It's a GCB, the Moose, and the Candy Man. Like a freight train rolling, bringing truth bombs down the line. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. SCV chat starts now.
Howdy. Happy New Year. Happy new season. Happy Moose. Hey, Moose, what happened to y'all's coach again?
Faversham. Oh, you.
Faversham. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this series premiere. I know that tonight is a very interesting night with the college football, all that good stuff going on. Really, two Southern teams again dominating the United States back to back. Georgia Bulldogs. Hope they do it for the SEC. But if Texas, TCU does it, they're a Southern state as well. So we produce the best athletes, the best culture, and the best food. But before we get started, the views and opinions, especially those that I just expressed, are not necessarily those of the SCV. It's GEC. It's any division, brigades, camps, or other subsidiaries, strictly those of us who are expressing them. Hey, Moose.
How is everybody doing?
I'm great, but I hope everybody else in the chat is having a great start to their new year. And for us Mississippians that are in the chat, or those who are descended from the patriots of the Magnolia State, happy Secession Day. Yes, in 1861, Mississippi left the Union to form its own republic and joined the Confederacy. So happy Secession Day. I think we have a special Secession Day banner. We don't. Thought we had a Magnolia flag on here. Oh, well.
We did. You told me to delete it and clear off space.
But we do need to clear off space. So anyway, hope everybody's having a great day. But this day also really quickly does have a more important thing or reason for me or symbol for me. It's actually my mother's birthday. So they're out doing birthday things. Me and Mom did birthday things yesterday, and now my sister and her husband, they're taking her to eat dinner, and I'm with you fine people this day. So yeah, weird weather that we're having. Yep. So, Moose, what'd you get for Christmas?
I got a lot of things for the farm business. For those who don't know, I've started to not take over, but start to carry a bit more weight on the dog part of my farm's business. So I got a lot of things for that.
You also got something else while you're up at headquarters too.
Yes. I was surprised with a life membership. I wish there was a video of it because I'm pretty sure I stared at Jason in disbelief for about 5 minutes. Eric was also very slick with it because I had no idea. He just gives me this life membership pin. He says, "Hey, we got an extra one of these. We're about to have a new shipment. Here you go." Didn't think twice about it. I was like, "Oh, I can't have this. I'm not a life member." Eric playing along just snatches it up and walks off. And then like 5 seconds later, Jason comes by and just pulls out the certificate. It was an awesome moment. I can't thank everybody enough for giving me that moment. It was definitely my favorite Christmas gift, tied probably with my farm logo or my dog logo front license plate that I get to put on my truck. It was an awesome day. I still can't comprehend how awesome it was.
And where is said certificate?
It's in my house.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I haven't been able to buy a frame for it yet, so I have it laid out in my room.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I thought I saw it this morning. I kind of
I've
rushed
been
out of
on
the
the
house.
I've been on the road today.
Connor, I go back to my house, and you have broken into my house, and you stole
I'm
my
not.
life membership. We're gonna have a problem.
I am only thing I listen. I'm just gonna say this. You had all of on our last episode, all of our chat heads ready for the gag reel. And did you have the gag reel ready?
Yes.
Did you play the gag reel during that episode?
No, it wouldn't upload. That's StreamYard's fault.
So
That's a
you did
software
not have.
problem.
So you did
A
not have it.
software problem.
Better be double checking on that certificate there, buddy.
I'm not at my house.
When you get home.
Calling my dad.
Anyway, well, while he is calling Daddy Moose to make sure that his certificate is at the house, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Hope everybody has had a great holiday season. We're ready to come back and start a fresh new season here with SCV Chat. One thing Moose and I were talking about earlier today, even, was we're going to try to do a theme for this season. Moose is aware of the theme, and he kind of helped come up with the name, the heroes of our heroes, so to speak. I'm gonna bring Moose back on because he's not been able to dial out. Anyway,
Time out. Connor.
Harrison,
Not there.
I'm sure it will show up.
Connor. If this is a prank, if this is whatever the heck this is, don't you touch that life membership. I want to see it back. I will see you this weekend.
No, you won't.
That in my hand.
No, you won't.
You're going to the other event, aren't you?
Yes.
Connor, I will drive up there for that certificate. I just got that.
All I know is for Christmas I got a new document shredder.
Oh, you touched that certificate, I quit. I'm not joking. This isn't a joke. You won't see me on the show no more.
Well, we'll leave it up to the chat heads.
What about the okay? It sounds like Connor stole my life membership certificate. He's implying that anyway. I just called my father. My life membership is not at my house anymore.
All I know is that a gag reel was promised and it wasn't delivered on time, and we had several upset chat heads. So we're going to let them determine the fate.
No. No. No.
Anyway, we'll talk more about that later on. But, Lord, we're actually this is just our first gag for this upcoming gag reel. I know we're going to be getting messages in and stuff about that. Gonna go ahead and end that right now. And he still has the life membership. I could just see tonight I'm going to be getting 1,000 messages people asking, "Do you really have the certificate? Where's the certificate?" So
I did get a message. How did he get in your house?
Yeah. So, haha, this is gonna be, y'all are getting a premiere of the gag reel for this upcoming year right now. No, we're actually looking at a couple of great things to get for this year, including better editing software, as well as a new camera for us for some of the things that we're planning. However, back to the serious point of what we're doing for at least the first half of this season, the heroes of our heroes. If y'all paid attention back in July for the 4th of July, every year we share something that says, The South was right in 1861 because America was right in 1776, which is a sentiment that I believe that every member of the SCV and every true student of Southern history understands and agrees with. Years ago, it was about 2015. Gerald, for me to take his girl, he would have to have one at first. But I believe it was 2015, maybe it was 2014. Sometime back when past Commander in Chief Tom Strain was Lieutenant Commander in Chief Tom Strain, I was introduced to a gentleman from the great and sovereign state of Alabama by the name of Carl Jones. And we began talking about things that were impacting the SCV and stuff with recruiting and retaining membership. And Carl said something that was very poignant that still hits with me today. The South has 400 years of history and culture that continues to develop and makes us who we are. But we focus on those 4 years of the war. We let that define us, not everything else that happened in 1860 or 1607 to today. And that's what we're trying to pull. Let me digress back to the main point. I got ahead of myself. One thing that we discussed was how can the average Southerner be proud of their Confederate ancestors if they're not even proud of being Southern? And that really stuck with me. And that's something that we've been trying to facilitate within the show is in prod of our ancestry from 1607 all the way to today. The things that make us who we are, the things that have that makes the South a great place that it is, our own unique country, people, group, things of that nature. So what we're wanting to do is dive into our Revolutionary War ancestry, the heroes of our Confederate heroes, the men from the South who helped influence the first American War for Independence. And that's what we're having with this. So what we'll be doing is on the first Monday night of every month, we will be diving into some aspect of the American Revolution leading up to July 4th, America's secession holiday, going back to what the Kennedy twins have been doing with Make Dixie Great Again for years, because secession is America's oldest tradition. That's happened. We even, if you watched our secession videos, we essentially seceded from ourselves with the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. So we're going to be doing that. So get ready for that. This month, of course, we're starting off with John Paul Jones, the father of the United States Navy, and the Southern ties that he had. Next month, I believe we'll have Michael Hardy on. Michael, I see you in the chat. We'll get with you a little bit later about the actual date and stuff. Work just got ahead of me today. Or I'd have lined it up with you. But the Battle of Kings Mountain and the Over the Mountain Men in North Carolina. I'm trying to pull up our exact list.
I got it if you want me to talk about it.
You sent it to me a second ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to pull that up. So episode 2 would be Kings Mountain. Episode 3 is the Lees of Old Virginia, which what we'll be talking about is Robert E. Lee, of course, his father, Light Horse Harry Lee, his great uncle, Richard Henry Lee, all the Lees of Virginia, as well as George Washington, and the influences and impact that the American Revolution had on Robert E. Lee's life. That'll be in March. We will still be doing some stuff in there, like our Funds with Flags episode. We'll still be doing that in March. Episode number 5, we're going to revisit a topic that we visited in the first season, which was Francis Berrien, the Swamp Fox. Talking about him, and then we'll do a movie review the next week about The Patriot, which was loosely based off of his life, and another Southerner, Daniel Morgan's Virginia Rifleman. In April, like I said, that's what we'll be doing then, as well as other Confederate memorial stuff. On May 8th, we will be doing an in-depth look at George Washington, the sword of the American Revolution. In June, we will do Patrick Henry, the voice of the American Revolution. And leading up to the 4th of July in June, we will do Thomas Jefferson, the pen of the American Revolution, and at some point we want to have a special another constitutionality of secession debate topic and things like that. After July, we'll have our national reunion coverage, and then we'll either continue on with this theme or we'll go to another one.
I got ideas for both. We're just kind of keeping everything open right now.
Right, but we really want to instill in that, especially with if while we're not a partisan organization, if you've been watching the news at all, everything that's happened with the American government and seeing what's happening, the ideals and the principles that our republic was founded upon in back in the 1700s. Those ideals of the republic that our ancestors, our Confederate ancestors, fought for, which were the same ideals that their ancestors fought for, are still under attack today. And it's time for the South to wake up and realize that we are the last bastion of defense for those republic ideas. And it's up to us to do something again. And that's also going back with the Dixie Rising, and how we reclaim the narrative and reclaim our Southland. So yeah, I know we missed a lot of comments because I was staring over at a copy of a print of a sailing ship that I have in my Conroe is not on a couch. Thank you very much, Moose. I am on a very overstuffed recliner that has a nice Tennessee throw blanket on the back of it.
It's very nice. Looks comfortable.
Go Big Orange. So yeah. Anyway, before we get really kicked in, just for those that we haven't said hey to, was Charles LeRae, my cousin Charles. We actually share a Revolutionary War ancestor. Ironically, talking about that, see him in the chat. Dr. Mitchum, good evening to you. Jerry Dupree from my camp, good evening. Wes, Tom, Paul, I was so happy to see that Miss Linda drove home from church yesterday. That's great that she's doing better. We're continuing to pray for her and her speedy recovery. Look forward to see her soon. Herb Turner from Missouri, glad to see you. Matt Singleton, love you, buddy. Scrolling through, David Pope, hope everything's good in East Tennessee. Donald Gaines from my camp, Commander-in-Chief Jason Boshears. Sean McFall from one of our spinoffs. The Look Around South Florida, continuing to go down, just going through really quickly.
Michael C. Hardy also restarted their new season, which is on Tuesdays, 7 o'clock Confederate Standard Time, if I'm not mistaken.
Good. All right, so we're going to talk about. There's my Lieutenant Commander Stan Rhoda. Stan, God love him, went to the icy north during the coldest time of the year. Hope that he had a fun trip up there, visiting his family above the line. Stan, were you near Saskatoon by chance?
He was really up there.
Reason why I'm asking is we haven't heard from the son of Harold Philpott in a while. I'm hoping that he's okay up there.
Wasn't his internet out on the Christmas episode?
No, he was boycotting the Christmas episode.
I'll ask when we get off air.
Something about, I don't know, I can't remember. Something about Pop-Tarts.
Because we didn't call it a Pop-Tart break one episode?
I think that was it. But anyway, so getting on to tonight's topic. Talking about a man who of course, just like every other hero of the American Revolution, for some reason, or even the colonial era of the United States of America. If you look at colonial history, everything is seated in the North. And that goes back from the Yankees stealing our history, collectively, our collective national history, to bolster their superiority, and continue subjugation of the South. But they continue to do that over and over again. And case in point, Thanksgiving. Now, while we Southerners know, and we have talked about on the show in the past, that the first Thanksgiving was actually in Virginia, 2 years before Plymouth colony was even founded. Um, they steal all of our national, or they try to, that period, that founding period, history. But it was not just New England and the upper colonies. The southern colonies played a huge portion as well. One person that has been kind of stolen, or at least his southern connections have been downplayed, was John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones, really, when you look at him, he exemplifies the things that made Southern culture what it was. John Paul Jones being of Scottish descent, which, as we've discussed on here, the Scotch-Irish, influence on the South and settlement in the South, things like that. So, really quickly, just to run through a quick biography, which is going to be most of this episode. John Paul Jones was born on July 6, 1747, in Scotland, as we mentioned. Originally, he was named John Paul. John Paul was born to his father, John Paul Sr., and his mother. His parents were married in 1733. And I will not try to pronounce the area where he was born. Anyway, John Paul Sr. was a gardener on an estate, and the family was very rather large, from what I can understand in my research of them. But they, excuse me, wanted to get, and of course, back in that era, if you wanted to get a job working up in a different field from what you're born in, you were into an apprenticeship. One thing that we have to remember is that in the Royal Navy, that if, let's say, Daddy Moose wanted to get Moose into the Royal Navy, if he wanted him to be in that officer class of the Royal Navy, he would have to buy him a commission as a midshipman. And with that bought commission, he would learn how to navigate using the sun and the stars, how to command a section of guns, navigation, sailing, tactics, all that good stuff. Again, had to purchase the commission. Well, John Paul's family was not a wealthy, well-to-do family that could purchase him a commission. So instead, John Paul, at the age of 13, was apprenticed to a ship's captain for I believe it was 7 years.
Yep.
And while doing that, he sailed. He was accepted and was put on a ship. And they first sailed out of Whitehaven in northern English county of Cumberland on the ship Friendship. John Paul's older brother, William, by this point had already married and settled in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So really, that's a key point. John Paul's brother, William, was a tailor, and like I said, settled in Williamsburg. And that's where John Paul really gets connected. His first connection is to the South. Not Williamsburg, Fredericksburg, excuse me. As we know, studying the war, Fredericksburg later becomes a battle site during the Battle of Fredericksburg, and pivotal during the Chancellorsville campaign. Continuing on with what we found, often the destinations for John Paul's ships was the Virginia colony. Originally, John Paul was a part of the transatlantic slave trade, the ship that he was on. This is before that was abolished. And he absolutely abhorred being a part of that, for multiple reasons, not only being a sin against mankind and a sin against God, but it was the sickening conditions that those ships were in. The fact that the diseases went through the crew as well as through everybody on board. He just didn't like it. Eventually, the captain of the ship and the company that he was working for was bankrupt. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Harrison. Halfway through his apprenticeship, and he was released from it.
Yeah.
So when he was released from it, he went back to England or Great Britain and began finding work. Eventually, he is promoted to being an officer on the King George as a third mate, the two friends as a first mate, and eventually left off of that ship. He began all of a sudden his voyage, or not his voyage, excuse me, his journey began to advance really quickly during his next voyage on the brig the John, which was sailing from port in 1768 when suddenly yellow fever broke out, and the captain and the other officers ahead of him died of yellow fever. John Paul, being the most senior seaman and being the only person on board, he knew how to get the ship safely back to port. And when he got back to port, the vessel's owner made him master of the ship and its crew, and also gave him 10% of the cargo. And he led 2 voyages to the West Indies during that time. And that was when he was going to the West Indies. He was part of the triangular trade route. So if you remember in your history classes, they would load the ship down with English goods, sail to the West Indies, sell those goods off, buy sugar, rum, and molasses, and then go up to Virginia, sell those, and come back with tobacco and timber, fur, other goods that the new iron ore, pig iron, stuff like that, and then taking it back to England to sell at a higher price. So they would go and do that over and over and over again. However, during one of these voyages, John Paul had a little bit of a crisis with his crew. There was a mutineer that was under his command. Guy was trying to start stuff. He wanted to be paid his wages early and go into town when they made it to port and drink. Well, John Paul quickly squashed those ideas by having the man flogged. Again, this was during that was a common practice at sea. The American Navy did it all the way up to at least the 1830s. The British Navy did it longer. Heck, the British Army did it all the way up into the Zulu Wars. But that's how they would discipline somebody. They would flog him in front of the entire crew, and the crew would see that, hey, this is what can happen to me, and it would restore order. The guy gets flogged, and he was the son of a noble or well-to-do gentleman.
Very well-known gentleman.
Very
powerful gentleman.
Yeah, and he did not appreciate that. That his son was disciplined in that way, and said that it was unnecessarily cruel. Those claims were initially dismissed, but the sailor died a few weeks later, and John Paul was eventually arrested for the supposed involvement in that man's death, and he was imprisoned. But after sailors on the ship said no, the guy was and a very rudimental autopsy was performed, saw that the scars from the flogging had healed, that he was in good spirits before his death, that the flogging had nothing to do with it. John Paul was proved innocent, but the being a hard taskmaster on a ship, that reputation followed him for the rest of his life. When he was released, the local governor encouraged John to get out of there while he could. And he did. John then went down to London, and he commanded a London registered vessel named the Betsy. It was a West Indian man, had 22 guns on it, and again began going through that trading route. And one of its port of calls was Tobago. And at Tobago, again, the crew wanted early wages paid, so they could go into town and spend a couple of nights there on shore with their families, their friends, that sort of thing. John's idea was, we're one leg through our journey. yeah, I could go ahead and pay them, but then I'm going to have less money. The ship will have less money to then buy goods and then flip them and continue to make more and more profits. The guys could not see through that. John could, though. Excuse me. However, one of the ringleaders, demanded it and was going to shore. John, who was a rather small man in stature. I think we need to go ahead and cover that. In fact, he was about 5'5".
Yeah,
Um,
5'4", 5'5", I think.
yeah, and Thomas Jefferson also referred to him as Little Jones, and we'll get to how he got that nickname in a second. Anyway, John is backed into a corner, backed into his cabin by this guy who's larger than him. And of course, if you've seen any of the Age of Sail ships movies or anything like that, those guys were tough muscle from just working out in the sea, pulling ropes, everything like that. John gets back down to his cabin. Everything thinks it's okay to go. John comes out with his sword, and suddenly the mutineer, sees John. And he says, "Well, this little guy's not taking a hint." Grabs a bludgeon and goes to bash John's brains in, and John stabs him. And the guy, of course, succumbs to his fate. And John goes, and suddenly he's on the run because he is in that area. He's in Tobago, where that guy was from. There's no way he's going to receive a fair trial. There's no way that he's going to, not be lynched, essentially.
And that was a very well-known and liked man, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right. And even though it was in self-defense, the big thing was there was no admiral's court. It was only a local civil court. Had there been a naval admiralty court that could have tried the case, John would have been found not guilty. But because of that, John goes on the lam, and we actually, historians, lose a couple of years of John's life during this time. And it's assumed that at that point is when John begins adopting the last name Jones. Are you John Paul? No, I'm John Jones.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Brilliant.
Really not that far of a stretch, but I mean, it worked. Because John ends up being able to escape, and he makes it to Fredericksburg, Virginia, where his brother was from. And this is another key tie-in with the South. During that time when he's in Fredericksburg, he actually courts the lady who would become the voice of the Revolution's wife, Patrick Henry's wife. But it never went any further, because he was an unemployed brother of the local tailor. John had amassed a small fortune from his triangular trade, but all of his money was in the Caribbean or in England. And had he gone to collect that, that would have been asking to be arrested. So he's essentially restarting his life. When he gets up to Virginia. At some point, John's brother William dies while he's up there, and he's there to arrange the affairs of his brother. Because there wasn't any immediate family, John was able to inherit all that stuff, so that was good. And we get to roughly 1770. Well, actually, let me backtrack a second. At some point, John does make it to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because in 1774 he was elected to the American Philosophical Society. Also, at some point in his earlier life, John Paul, when he was in Scotland, joined the Masonic Lodge, and that comes into play in the next little bit. 1775, rolls around, and the America is not in. We're in rebellion, but we haven't declared independence yet. Lexington and Concord has happened. It's more of a defensive action against a tyrannical government while trying to still receive an olive passing an olive branch to the king. And the United States is trying to birth a Navy and Marine Corps during this time. A vast majority of the, for lack of a better term, continental naval forces are privateers. And for those that are not familiar with privateers, you were issued a letter of marque saying that Harrison over here, Moose over here, is in command of the SS Moose, and it's a private vessel, but he is acting on behalf of the United States, or colony of Massachusetts, or the Continental Congress, and he is allowed to go and raid commerce and things like that, and on behalf of our governments. It's legal piracy, for lack of a better term, and for oversimplification sake. Well, John Paul does not want to do that. Now, John Paul Jones, rather, he does not want to do that. John Paul Jones actually approaches from stuff I've read. It's Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, and there's some debate on that. But Richard Henry Lee, of course, he's the man who gave us the Virginia Resolution that later became the Declaration of Independence. Be it resolved that these colonies have no allegiance to Great Britain and are and henceforth and shall forever be free and independent states. Anyway, various sources say it was Richard Henry Lee. Other would say that it was a gentleman from North Carolina. Anyway, between Richard Henry Lee and the Masonic connections that John Paul Jones made through a business partner's brother, who is a congressman from North Carolina. John Paul Jones is commissioned as a first lieutenant by the Continental Congress, and put in charge of a newly converted 24-gun frigate called the USS Alfred. And that happened on December 7th of 1775. So here we are. John's in the Continental Navy. Again, he's lived in the South. And the reason why he ended up getting the commission was because the other Continental officers came from New England and those upper states. They needed a Southern officer to try to continue to keep the South in with. This is before independence, guys. Remember, this is 1775. This is when we're trying to knit together a nation out of 13 unruly colonies that, North Carolina and South Carolina may not agree on anything on the Continental Congress floor. But when you throw Massachusetts and those hotheads in there, God help us. So he was given his commission to bring them in. Jones sailed from the Delaware River in February of 1776 aboard the Alfred on its first cruise. And John was given the honor of raising the first U.S. ensign over the vessel. He was part of a fleet that was expected to cruise along the coast, but instead he was ordered to sail from the Bahamas. While they were sailing down in the Bahamas, Nassau was raided for military supplies. They had a small encounter with a British packet ship on their return voyage. It wasn't successful. And when he was returned home, Jones was assigned to the sloop, the USS Providence. And Congress had recently ordered the construction of 13 frigates for the American Navy. And one of those was to be commanded by Jones. The way it was given out was by seniority. But something ended up happening, and Jones got moved later on down the list, even though that he was one of the best captains, not by rank, but commanders of naval vessels that we had at that time. Anyway, he ends up trading that out for command of the Providence. And Jones performs various services for the Continental Navy and Congress, including transporting troops, moving supplies, escorting convoys. And during that time, Jones was able to assist a brig from Hispaniola that was being chased by a British ship that was laden with military stores. The brig was eventually purchased by Congress and became the USS Hampton. Jones later sailed for 6 weeks up to Nova Scotia in Canada. And while on that sailing during that 6 weeks, he captured 16 prize vessels that and inflicted significant damage on Canso in Canada. So again, he's showing his worth. He's capturing these vessels. Several of these vessels, from my research, he had to actually burn to the waterline because he eventually could not, crew them. No, we're not taking a Pop-Tart break. He couldn't crew them because he wouldn't have enough men to crew his own ship, which is really, really good. When he returned back to port and refit to sea, he was ordered to liberate hundreds of American prisoners that were in forced labor in coal mines in Nova Scotia, and also to raid British shipping. And on November 1st, 1776, Jones set sail in command of a ship called the Alfred to carry out this mission. Winter conditions prevented freeing the prisoners, but he did result in the capture of the ship Mellish that was carrying a vital supply of winter clothing intended for General Johnny Burgoyne's troops in Canada. Those captured British clothes were sent to Valley Forge and kept the American Continental Army together and kept them warm during that horrible winter. Despite his successes at sea, Jones's disagreements with those in authority reached a brand new level when he arrived in Boston and began feuding. Say again?
I said it was quite impressive. Within
Yeah.
about a year-ish time, he had already made a big name for himself and had a reputation of perfectionist, if you will.
Right.
Men didn't want to serve under him, and I think it was getting hard for him to find people that would serve under him by 77.
Yeah, and the other thing that we often forget, with volunteer crews and things like that, going back to the whole privateer thing, those ships that Jones captured and sold back as prizes, his crew was able to so his crews, when they sold those prize ships back, they did not receive 100% of the profits. The then Continental government received some of the profits of selling those ships and the cargo off, and then a portion of those profits were then given to the crew to split. And depending on your rank was depending on how much percentage you got. Meanwhile, if you were on a privateer and you captured a prize ship and brought it back into port and sold it, that money did not go back to the I keep wanting to say the federal government, but it was the Continental government. That money did not go back to the Continental government. It went back to your ship. So you got a larger share of whatever prize monies that were offered or captured. So I mean, you think about it. Here I can go work for the Continental Navy. Yeah, I'm going to get a promised amount of pay, or I can go work for this privateer and for sure make a larger amount of money doing the same work. I mean, what would you do?
And it's a more relaxed environment too. Again,
right?
Like you have a military, and then you have
mercenaries.
I hate kind of equivalating it to that, but that's what it was. And then again, you had John Paul Jones, who was a perfectionist, and apparently he gave out very little praise and a lot of critiques.
Right. Well, I mean, the man had spent his life at sea. I mean, he knew what he was doing.
He knew what he was doing. We had such a young Navy people who did sign up probably didn't know too much, or if they did, they didn't know anywhere near as much as John Paul Jones did. And again, he was a perfectionist, so he was going to tell you if you were doing something wrong and how he would do it, and that's a good thing.
Right, and that's the other thing. I mean, John Paul, and that's something we did not mention. John Paul came into the Revolution having just commanded merchant ships. He did not command military vessels leading into this. So what he learned about gunnery and things like that, he was essentially self-taught on. And that's the same thing. I mean, the mightiest and John Paul and his men, the Continental Navy, are going up against the might of the British Empire. Great Britain's an island. United Kingdom is an island. They had the premier naval force in the in the world at that time. It was an uphill battle. But still they continued on. The problem that John hits in 1776 that doesn't really help him is he began a feud with a commodore by the last name of Hopkins. Joan believed that Hopkins was hindering his advancement by taking down his campaign plans. John had these better plans of what he wanted to do, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And this feud erupts between them between December of 1776 and June of 1777. And what ends up happening, he's given a command of a smaller ship called the USS Ranger. But it was a newly constructed ship. And he began making preparations for war. And Jones sailed to France on November 1st, 1777, with orders to assist the American cause however possible. So just get on out there, do whatever you can, just go to France. He eventually makes it into France, and John Paul, from everything, the rating and stuff like that, and that's something else we failed to mention. John has become kind of a pop star almost in the American press. What the birth of the American press. In the British press, he's considered as a pirate. But France, whose ancient enemy is England or Great Britain, is absolutely loving him because you got this little guy, or I say little guy, but you got this old guy over there named Ben Franklin who's trying to. I'm sorry for moving the camera around, guys. I've got a laptop I'm working off of. I'm trying to stay somewhat comfortable. But anyway, he eventually makes it over to France and begins partying with Ben Franklin a little bit. And while he's over there, he begins bending Ben Franklin's ear about giving him some ideas. This is what I want to do, and we'll get into his ideas in a second. Anyway, the French end up giving him or promised him the command of a new naval vessel that was being constructed for America by the Netherlands, or by the Netherlands in Amsterdam. However, the British were able to put pressure on the Dutch, and instead of selling it to America, they sold it to France, which had not yet allied with America. So Jones was again left without a command, and an unpleasant reminder of his stagnation in Boston. And he just wasn't really happy. But again, during that time, he developed that friendship with Franklin. On February 6th of 1778, France signed the Treaty of Alliance with America, formally recognizing the independence of the United States, or the American Republic. Again, that came from the Battle of Saratoga. And Captain Jones's Ranger became the first American naval vessel to be formally saluted by the French with a 9-gun salute fired from a Captain Lamont Packett's flagship. Jones wrote of the event that I accepted his offer all the more after all it was a recognition of our independence and in the nation. So on April 10th, Jones set sail from Brest, France, for the western coast of Great Britain. So we talked about a second ago, Jones had this weird idea of what to do. What he wanted to do was, the American ports were being blockaded. Sound familiar? Happened to us. But the American ports were being blockaded by the British. Commerce was not allowed to get in. Food was not allowed to get in. We couldn't get in guns, muskets, that sort of thing. In fact, some of the new ships that America was building, as soon as they set sail, the British would sink them. It was hard to get in and out of those ports. But Jones thought, okay, well, if we begin putting pressure on the British home front, if we begin raiding towns and ports and stuff in England, they're going to have to pull some of their blockading squadron to come and chase us off, or at least defend home, because the last thing that Parliament wants is a bunch of civilians screaming, oh, ugh. And Wes, you are right that Admiral Sims did point out the hypocrisy of the Yankees by calling Sims a pirate when he was doing the exact same thing, who they considered a hero. Again, stealing our hero.
Yeah.
Oh, Susie said hey. Hey, Susie. Anyway, so Jones and the Ranger, they begin to head out, and they begin raiding merchant shipping in the Irish Sea. And he persuaded his crew in April of 1778 to participate in an assault on Whitehaven. Now, if you remember, when he left for his apprenticeship, that's the same port that he sailed out of at first. So, in a sense, John Paul Jones is coming home. Jones later wrote about the poor command qualities of his senior officers, having tactically avoided such matters, in a report saying that their object was gain, not honor. They were poor. Instead of encouraging the morale of the crew, they excited them to disobedience. Excuse me. They persuaded them that they had the right to judge whether a measure that was proposed was good or bad. Again, democracy, instead of it being an actual command, just leaving it up to the crew. John didn't pull that. Anyway, John and them begin on April 20th. Jones learned that after capturing some British sailors or Royal sailors, that the HMS Drake was anchored off of somewhere in Ireland that I'm not going to Carrickfergus, Ireland. So yes, but John wanted to attack it when he heard that. Therefore, so John decided that, or they wanted to do the attack right after midnight. Excuse me, sorry.
You all right?
Yeah, I got a little snuff in my throat.
Mm.
It ended up failing. The attack against the Drake did. They tried to drop the anchor, but the timing was wrong. They would have been because they were just trying to drop the anchor right beside the ship and blasted smithereens. Time was wrong, so instead of weighing his own anchor, he had to cut the anchor cable and run. And the winds had shifted, so he recrossed the Irish Sea, and he attempted to make another attempt at raiding Whitehaven. And they did. Jones led an assault with 2 boats of 15 men just after midnight on April 23rd, hoping to set fire and to sink all the ships anchored in Whitehaven's harbor, which numbered between 200 and 400 wooden vessels and consisted of a full merchant fleet and many coal transporters. They hoped to terrorize the town people by lighting further fires, but as it happened, the journey to shore was slowed by the shifting wind as well as a strong ebbing tide. They were able to successfully spike the town's big defensive guns to prevent them from being fired, but lighting fires proved to be a little bit more difficult as the lanterns in both boats had ran out of fuel. So some of the party were sent to raid a public house or a bar on the seaside, but the temptation to stop for a quick drink led to further delay as dawn was breaking. By the time they returned, they began the arson attacks. So efforts to concentrate on the coal ship Thompson and the hope that the flames would spread to adjacent vessels. They were all grounded by the low tide. However, one of the crew slipped away and alerted the residents on a harborside street. A fire alert was sounded, and a large number of people came running, forcing the Americans to retreat and extinguish the flames with the town's 2 fire engines. The townspeople's hopes of sinking John Paul Jones's boat with cannon fire were dashed because he had spiked the guns. the fact that he was able to do this really messed with the British morale.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until, I think 1999 or something like that, he was um, formally pardoned by, or maybe it was 2005, that he was formally pardoned from attacking the town. Um, anyway, Jones and the Ranger eventually went back to the Irish Sea, trying to make another attempt at the Drake that was anchored. Uh, Late in the afternoon of the 24th, the ships, roughly equally in firepower, engaged in combat. Earlier in the day, the Americans had captured the crew of a reconnaissance boat and learned that the Drake had taken on dozens of soldiers with the intent of grappling and boarding the Ranger. So Jones made sure that it didn't happen, and he captured the Drake after an hour-long gun battle in which the British captain was killed. Lieutenant Simpson was given command of the Drake for the return journey to Brest. The ship separated during the return journey as the Ranger chased another prize, leading to a conflict between Simpson and Jones. But both ships were able to arrive at port safely, but Jones filed for a court martial of Simpson and kept him detained on the ship. Partially through the influence of John Adams, who was still serving as a commissioner in France, Simpson was released from Jones's accusation. Adams implies in his memoirs that the overwhelming majority of the evidence supported Simpson's claims. Adams seemed to believe that Jones was hoping to monopolize on the mission's glory, especially by containing Simpson on board while he celebrated the capture with the English dignitaries. So in 1779, we're getting close to the end of the war. John Paul Jones took command of a 42-gun ship. Y'all excuse me for one moment. While the command of the ship, the most popular, Franklin was a popular diplomat over in France. And his book, Poor Richard's Almanac, was a very popular book because of Franklin over there. And Jones ended up naming his new ship after the French title, and the translation is Poor Richard, but it's the Baham Richard, which was a merchant ship that was rebuilt by the Americans. And that's the ship where John gets his most famous battle.
Mm-hmm.
It's where he fights the Serapis as well as the Alliance. The Battle of Flamborough Head, and it's at this battle where where his famous quote, "I've not yet begun to fight," is uttered.
Has to be one of the best comebacks in American history and just history in general. I'm sure you know this. I hope you don't mind me just randomly interrupting you for it.
No, please do.
But the reason that was uttered was because in the middle of the fighting, the British commander thought that John Paul Jones was pulling up, putting his colors up, which was a sign of surrender. And
Pulling them down,
pulling them down,
and that's actually later in the battle, Harrison. When he says, "I've not yet begun to fight," was the winds had shifted. At that particular portion, and in the age of sail before the age of steam, if you don't have the wind power, you're pretty much screwed.
Yeah.
And the Richard was actually outgunned by the bigger ships, or by the British ships, and that's when somebody said, we need to strike our colors from another ship, and that's when he said, "I've not yet begun to fight," because they demanded him surrendering in that phase of the battle. But the battle went on for an hour. And he began clearing the decks with his deck guns as well as Marine marksmen in the riggings. But what you're talking about happens a little bit later. after just being pounded left and right and changing blows with the British, his ensign is shot down. And that's when one of the British officers, believing that they struck their colors, Jones said, it's a little depending on Jones said, he said, I'm determined to make you strike, back to him, because you're right across. I mean, they're close enough to where they can yell at each other. But some of the sailors under Jones said that he said, I may sink, but I'll be damned if I strike.
Still pretty
Anyway,
good comeback.
great comeback. It's great. And it shows the tenacity that this fighting Southern Scotsman has. One of the ships that's allied with him the entire time is sailing around and blasting broadsides into this larger British ship, but it's doing just as much damage to the poor Richard as much as it is to the other ship. So it's going on left and right. Eventually, Jones's crew sinks the British ship, but he also loses the poor Richard. But they do capture a British ship and take it into Holland. And Holland, he did not have his ensign. Ended up being lost. And when he was going to Holland to refit, he had to suddenly register a new ensign, and he had heard the description of the new American flag, but had not seen it yet. So he quickly had his crew make a flag, and this is a rendition of the flag that was, and it looks actually pretty cool. That was registered to him, and it's known as the Jones flag in Holland. So yeah, Moose, fill in for me for a second. I'm lost my notes page.
Okay. And so it was around this time that, depending on which documentary you watched, mine told me that the one I watched in preparation for this, that after this was the height of his career. He continued to terrorize Great Britain, and his name became a staple of fear among them and praise in Paris and in America. But how much longer do you want to spend on this timeline of the war?
I mean, I think at this point we can safely say that with everything that he did, we can skip to the point where he is knighted by King Louis the 16th of France.
Okay.
Just because of how much hatred the French had for the British. And he accepted the honor, and whenever he went around, he was titled as Chevalier or Knight. And in fact, when Congress resolved in 1787 to give him a commemorative medal for his valor and brilliant services, he had it presented to Chevalier John Paul Jones, which is kind of cool.
Oh yeah, very cool.
Jones was also an original member of the Society of Cincinnati, which was a fraternal organization to commemorate the American Revolution. And he was a original member from there. What's really cool, you would think that his story ends there, but it doesn't. John eventually, I mean, he wants to keep his American citizenship, but the Continental Navy is disbanded. The United States doesn't create a navy. So he's suddenly a man without a job now, and he gets a letter from Empress Catherine II of Russia offering him a job, pretty much being an admiral.
Was an
in
admiral or a rear admiral?
Well, it's the same thing. It's like a lieutenant general or a general, but he's still an admiral in the Russian Navy, and he takes the war to the Turks. The Ottoman Empire during one of the wars between one of the Russo-Turkish wars, and did a little bit of that, and he fought over there. He eventually had to leave Russia and was exiled because the Russian aristocracy didn't really care for him, and they alleged some stuff against him. But before he leaves, he was given the Order of Saint Anne by Catherine the Second.
Can I just point out on one of the things you sent me? Me and you sent a couple of things to
Right.
prepare for this episode to make sure we both had at least a good, decent bit of knowledge. It's been a while since I've studied the Revolutionary War, and I definitely needed this. There is some evidence that good old John Paul Jones's personality. I talked about him being a perfectionist and kind of one of those guys that's just not really easy to understand, if you will. It seems like this little curse of his followed him into Russia, and
Oh yeah.
there's a good bit of evidence that political enemies of him that wanted him out of Russia are the ones that accused him of said crime that got him out of Russia. It is also needed to know that he was cleared of this, but the damage was already done.
Right, exactly, and we're not going to go into that.
Yeah.
You need to research your own self.
Well,
But anyway, he was after he was while this was going on, and he was somewhat exonerated. Catherine II granted him 2 years of leave abroad, which was again a de facto exile. But during that time, John Paul wrote his own book, The Narrative of the Campaign of the Lyman, um, which is by John Paul himself. Uh, like I said, he was given the Order of Saint Anne, but he left the following month and was very embittered. I don't think he was paid for his services. In 1789, Jones arrives in Warsaw, Poland, where he befriended Tadeusz Kosciuszko. And I know that's the correct pronunciation because we have a town in Mississippi named after him. But Kosciuszko was a veteran of the American Revolutionary War. And Kosciuszko advised him to leave the service of the Russians and serve another power, suggesting Sweden. But despite Kosciuszko's backing, the Swedes, while somewhat interested, ended up deciding not to recruit Jones. Catherine, who retained a personal enmity for Jones, also had blocked his appointment to not just get into the Swedish Navy, but the Danish Navy as well. Eventually, the French offer him a job, but I don't. It doesn't. It doesn't. He doesn't take it. In June of 1792, Jones was appointed as a U.S. consul to treat with the Dey of Algiers for the release of some American captives. I think it's good to backtrack for a second that Jones was living in Paris.
yeah.
After he left Russia.
Retirement, much like to a lot of our American heroes from that time period, seemed like it did not suit him well. "Quote unquote"
Right.
retirement,
Right. Yeah. And he arrives in Paris in May of 1790. And he still was retaining his position as a rear admiral, with the pension, which allowed him to remain in retirement until his death. But during this time, he made several attempts to re-enter service in the Russian Navy, but Catherine did not respond to his letter. She explained it to some go-betweens that Jones's service record was not exceptional and that the Russian seamen refused to serve under him. Again,
that famous perfectionist
right,
reputation has followed him throughout his whole career.
right. He had published his memoirs in Edinburgh, and inspired James Fenimore Cooper, Alexander Dumas. They eventually wrote books based on his fictionalized or some fictionalized accounts of Jones's maritime activities, um, including The Pilot and Dumas' Capital Paul, which is a follow-up novel to The Pilot. This was well after his death. Um, In June, like we said, in June of 1792, Jones was appointed as a U.S. consul. He's in retirement, and he was to treat with the Dey of Algiers for the release of some American captives. But before he was given his appointment information, he was found dead, lying down in his bed of his third floor apartment in Paris on the Rue de Tournon on July 17th, 1792. He was 45 years old. Um, Cause of death was tuberculosis, um, or well,
It's a couple of
tuberculosis nephritis, which was a kidney disease, really. Um, a small possession of servants, friends, and loyal family members walked his body 4 miles for the burial. He was buried in Paris at the St. Louis Cemetery, which belonged to the French royal family. But 4 years later, the French revolutionary government sold the property and the cemetery was forgotten. In 1905, though, Jones's remains were identified by a U.S. ambassador to France, who had searched for 6 years to track down the body using faulty copies of Jones's burial records. Um, they ended up finding him. The body was mummified. It was preserved in alcohol and interred in a lead coffin in the event that the United States would want to reclaim his remains. They may be more easily identified. They began searching with an old map of Paris, and they found the site of the former St. Louis Cemetery for alien Protestants, and they were able to do some sounding probes, searching for lead coffins, and 5 coffins were ultimately exhumed. The third coffin was unknown or unearthed rather on April 7th, 1905. Was later identified by a post-mortem examination by doctors, and they said that it was Jones. An autopsy confirmed the original listing of the cause of death, and the face was later compared to a famous bust of Jones. His body was brought back to the United States aboard the USS Brooklyn, escorted by 3 other cruisers. And approaching the American coastline, 7 U.S. naval battleships joined the procession, escorting Jones's body back to America. On April 24th, 1906, Jones's coffin was installed in Bancroft Hall at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, which that's one thing that Jones was a good proponent of, was wanting to have a naval training for the United States. Following a ceremony in Dahlgren Hall presided by President Theodore Roosevelt, who gave a speech paying tribute to Jones and holding up as an example for the officers of the Navy, on January 26, 1913, the captain's remains were finally reinterred in a bronze and marble sarcophagus in the Naval Academy Chapel, where it still is today. And I was right. He was given an honorary pardon in 1999 by the Port of Whitehaven.
Something
So,
I
yeah.
want to point out before we kind of start getting ready to sign off is there is an engraving. I can't remember if it's on the casket or in the floor or around the floor of the casket, but it says he gave our Navy its earliest traditions, heroism, and victory.
Yeah, it must be on his casket because I'm trying to, or on his, I'm trying to pull up a picture of his grave site right now, and add that onto and it's uploading really quickly. He's got a really bomb burial.
Oh, it's very nice.
It's uploaded. Throw it up there if you don't mind. Here we go. Which it's naval in theme. You see the bottom of it's 4 dolphins. It's covered with seaweed and stuff like that. And if you look in the background, you can kind of see the flags that he flew under. The one on the left hand side, looking at it, that's the Great Union. The center one is his flag that was registered to him, and then the other one I believe is the current Stars and Stripes. But if you look at the around his grave, around his the sarcophagus, that's the names of his ships. So there's the Bon Richard around on the right side, the Alfred. I think that's the Providence up front. You can see the Ranger clearly on the left-hand side of that. I wouldn't mind going and visiting that.
Me either.
But yeah, so again, the whole thing with John Paul Jones is that if were it not for Southerners, if it were not for Richard Henry Lee, his brother living in Virginia, him living in Virginia, the congressman from North Carolina, this American hero, this Southern hero, would not be who we have. And no doubt we've talked about the ties already with Raphael Sims and John Paul Jones, and it just goes back to that American tradition. John Paul Jones is an American hero, but he's also a Southern hero. And it's time that we reclaim his life, his legacy. That if had it not been for him, America would not have had the success that we had in the American Revolution. No American Revolution, no Second Revolution of 1861. What you got, Moose?
I got nothing. I think you knocked it out of the park. I don't know if there's anything else to say on the matter.
There are several biographies, just really quickly, for those who are interested, that are written about John Paul Jones. There are several different articles that are online about John Paul Jones. The biography channel, which no longer exists, which was owned by A&E, produced a wonderful biography video about him, as well as I can't remember what that other YouTube channel is, but Moose can share those out there.
Yeah,
if he can.
What's an ex-mafia?
Biographics. I should have known that because I'm subscribed to that channel. But the Biographics channel has another great one. The one that A&E did is about. Give me a second. I'll tell you exactly. Come on.
I got them pulled up. I think.
I know that
Captain of the High Seas documentary.
Yeah.
Biography. Yeah, it's 44 minutes. I will repost both links on the SCV Chat Facebook page.
And then the Biographics one, that's about 22 minutes long. Very easy, like we said. Go ahead, Moose. Say again.
I said I'll get both of them up, and I think we got a list of books somewhere that I'll post later.
Yeah. There was one that was highly rated. I just couldn't get a copy of it in time. One of my favorite bands actually did a did a song about John Paul Jones. They're English, and it's called "John Paul Jones is a Pirate," which is a somewhat biographical song about him. And when I asked Michael C. Hardy if he wouldn't mind coming on talking, he said he asked me, "Wait, the American Revolutionary War hero or the drummer for Led Zeppelin?" I think that maybe several people were thinking we're going to be talking about the drummer for Led Zeppelin tonight. The most popular ones on a search, one of these is a national bestsellers. It's by Evan Thomas. It's John Paul Jones, sailor, hero, father of the American Navy. There's another one that looks like it's a little bit older. That is I've Not Yet Begun to Fight, a story about John Paul Jones. If you can find a copy of that. Elliot Morrison's John Paul Jones, Easton Press, John Paul Jones, a sailor's biography. So yeah, and then of course John Paul Jones's own memoirs.
I'll repost everything after the show. Make sure we got a good bit. Again, share this episode out, but also look into your own research. It's always good to look through things yourself, especially when it comes to history these days. As we all know, it's getting harder and harder to trust things that you read about history. So make sure you
Right.
always find good sources.
Right, and this is the other thing, guys. Like we said at the beginning of the show, if you're just now tuning in, one of the reasons why we're doing this way, doing this half the season, focusing on the first revolution, is because there's so much out there that makes the South a truly unique place, makes us a truly unique people, our unique history and everything that goes along with it. That has for so long by academia, mainstream academia, that growing up and going to high school, studying the American, well, eighth grade really, studying the American Revolution. Yeah, John Paul Jones. We learned about him, but we didn't learn about his Southern connections during that time period. I just automatically thought that okay, he was born in Scotland, he sailed over here, uh, got ticked off at the end of the war, went and fought for the Russians, and then died in France. I didn't realize that he lived in Virginia. I didn't realize that he was that it was a Virginian and a North Carolinian that got him his commission in the Continental Navy. Without the ties to the South, where would John Paul Jones have been? In fact, up until I don't know when if the house is still there, but there up until the time photography was around, the John Paul Jones house was still in Fredericksburg.
Interesting.
I'm sorry, Doug Grant, and I apologize, Michael. You may have said bass player, and I just thought drummer. I don't listen to Led Zeppelin that often. Trying to think. Go back through my notes and see if I missed anything on them.
I don't think I got everything. I write kind of broad notes for myself. Sometimes that gets me in trouble depending on how long ago I researched our topic. I'm not seeing anything else that we might have missed. I ain't seeing.
I said that Thomas Jefferson called him Little Jones.
Yeah, I don't think you ever talked about that story. That's something I didn't read about.
Oh yeah, he was called Little Jones. Speaking of his house, got the picture of the house that he inherited from his brother, who was the tailor, in Fredericksburg.
It's a very nice house.
Well, I mean, if anybody in the Virginia area can find out where that house was,
Please.
yeah, and if it's still standing, would love to go visit that. Hmm.
I'm just reading some of the comments. I'll make sure to share this episode out, people.
Yeah.
I was reading David's comment. That's very interesting, David. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've refound what I'd gotten off my research. Thomas Jefferson and others referred to him as Little Jones. He may have been 5'5", 5'4". Unlike other merchant seamen, he was well dressed, carried a sword, and conducted himself with practiced decorum. He had a Scottish brogue and light Celtic features. He was intense about his honor and his duties. That doesn't sound like a Southerner. I don't know what does. And was harsh. Was a harsh military master, but was also surprisingly sociable. He was a prolific poem and letter writer, spoke some French, and though he never married, was involved in many romances. Above all, no one questioned his daring in Britain. His naval actions against the mother country certainly led to his reputation as a pirate.
I'm not mistaken, I think I got it in here. You know, we talked about it for a bit with the lion's nose topic, but you know, he's one of those people that he had a great military Navy battle mind that didn't really get to strut it and show it off as much as we probably would have liked. We might have more stories if he did.
Yeah, I just found. I'm gonna put this on there for y'all. Just a brief good research thing for John Paul Jones about his about stuff chronologically of his life. But the very interesting thing, I forgot that the guy who ended up killing, his name was Mungo Maxwell,
Which
the
time?
one the whipping guy.
Oh, okay. I was about to say because I'm pretty sure the guy he stabbed with a sword, we don't know his name.
Right.
One of those lost to history moments, which is weird because the only reason John Paul fled.
No. I think Mungo was the one he stabbed. Was one of them.
Oh, I just remember what I read. They made a point to say that it's ironic that John Paul Jones had to flee and basically restart his whole life,
Right.
because this guy was so well loved and a big part of the community. He was born there, and that he killed him, so he was scared of an impartial trial. And we can't figure out his name or who he was. He's one of those people that we have lost to history.
Right.
Just random things that popped up in my head like that. But we got a couple links. We got Commander-in-Chief Bashir's put out the John Paul Jones Museum. We got the link from Conroe. And David Pope with the History and Heritage Command is very good at what they do. Good night, Miss Linda. Thank you for tuning in. We're about to sign off probably in a minute. Again, please share and make sure to tune in to our next episode.
Next week, what are we talking about, Harrison?
Do we write down next week, or is it one of those that we kind of just said we'd figure out? Nope, we don't have next week planned. Actually, if we want to get technical, that's on Carl. That's on Carl.
Yeah, because we took off for New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. That is technically no. We have 5 Mondays in January.
Well, we could do what I did last year. Last year, I had a Robert E. Lee week with starting at Monday on Robert E. Lee Day and ending it on Robert E. Lee's birthday.
We could do that.
Both Monday and Thursday next week.
We could do that.
I think the Kennedy are giving a Confederate Legion update on Robert E. Lee's birthday. So we might do, again, what I did last year and have a Monday, a Wednesday special, and then a Confederate Legion update on Thursday.
If I could find my books, what we could do is we could do that next week. And then the 23rd would be Carl, and then Monday, Hearth and Home on the 30th. Darn it.
What?
I was going to say trivia contest.
We could do that at some point.
Let's do the Robert E. Lee.
Okay. We'll come up for a more defined thing. The Thursday show for this week is up in the air. I have my camp meeting this Thursday, so I'm not going to be able to host it. I'm going to see if I can find a replacement. If not, I have a very special guest that I will reschedule, and me and him will come up with a new date. But yeah, no, 16th we'll definitely do something Robert E. Lee themed. Maybe even Wednesday, depending on what all we got. And then Thursday, we will have a Confederate Legion update.
Okay, well.
Sounds fun.
Guys, we've been at it for an hour and a half. It's time to sign off here. That's a good start to this first season. Remember to tune in Thursday for a look around the Confederation, possibly. and our other spinoffs, Alamo City Guards with Christian Lee, Look Around Southwest Florida. Guys, look forward to a great season. Remember, get out there, reclaim that narrative 1 week at a time. The words of the late and great Harold Philpott, no Fumar in the elevator,
No
and
Fumar.
never for up.
And